She's my neighbor, divorced, confident, and one night with her could change everything. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where sunlight spills lazily across the hallway of our apartment building, and I was carrying a small stack of letters when I noticed her for the first time. She appeared at the end of the corridor, effortlessly poised, her movements measured but unhurried. There was something about her presence that made the air feel warmer, heavier, almost magnetic. She was my neighbor, I soon realized, a woman in her early 40s, with a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention but naturally drew it. Her hair, dark with gentle waves, caught the light just so, and her smile had that subtle curve that made it seem like she knew a secret I didn't. Even in the casual, everyday moment of passing each other in the hallway, there was an aura about her that felt intimate, yet untouchable. As I approached, our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, I felt the weight of that gaze. Her eyes held a gentle teasing spark, a look that lingered just a little longer than socially expected. It wasn't overt, not bold, but it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't anticipated. She tilted her head slightly, an almost imperceptible invitation to say something, to bridge the quiet distance between us. When she spoke, it was simple, almost mundane. "Hi, I think we haven't formally met. I'm your neighbor." But her voice carried warmth, and it seemed to wrap around me, soft and melodic. The scent of her perfume was faint, floral, lingering just long enough to make me notice it more than I should have. As she handed me a small package I'd been waiting for, our fingers brushed ever so slightly. The touch was light, accidental, yet electric in its subtlety. My hand lingered a fraction longer than necessary, and I felt a strange mix of thrill and hesitation, like standing on the edge of something I wasn't sure I was ready for. I wanted to ask her more, about her day, her life, the little stories that seemed hidden in the gentle smile she wore, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I offered a quiet, awkward smile, and for a fleeting moment, the world narrowed down to the warmth of her presence, the soft tilt of her head, and the unspoken curiosity in her eyes. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter, brief as it was, had shifted something inside me. There was a tension I didn't understand, a pull I couldn't name, and a curiosity I knew I had to explore. She was more than just a neighbor, I realized, with a mix of excitement and apprehension, that she might become something unforgettable. Over the next few days, our encounters became small rituals, little sparks of connection in otherwise ordinary routines. I would often see her near the mailbox, sorting letters with a careful precision, or carrying a grocery bag that seemed just a little too heavy. Each time, I found myself lingering a fraction longer than necessary, captivated not just by her appearance, but by the way she moved, graceful, deliberate, entirely natural. One afternoon, she smiled as I approached. "You always seem to have too many letters," she said lightly, a teasing edge in her tone that made my chest tighten. I laughed awkwardly, handing her a stack of my own mismanaged mail. Our fingers brushed again, a fleeting, accidental contact, but my skin seemed to remember it long after it ended. There was a warmth in that touch, a subtle acknowledgement of each other's presence, that made the hallway feel smaller, more intimate. She began asking small questions about my day, casual and seemingly innocent. "Long shift?" she asked once, tilting her head, her eyes glinting with quiet curiosity. The way she looked at me felt different from how others might glance at a neighbor. Her gaze lingered, soft but probing, as if she was trying to read the lines of my day, the hidden tensions I carried. Every word she spoke seemed to carry a gentle weight, making me feel seen without judgment. And there was playfulness too, a tilt of her smile when I tripped over my own words, the way she leaned slightly closer when talking, just enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her. Each small gesture was charged with a quiet electricity. Her presence was comforting yet exhilarating, familiar yet entirely new. Despite the subtle flirtation, there was a sense of propriety woven into our interactions. Nothing crossed overt boundaries. She laughed softly at my awkward attempts to respond, her eyes crinkling at the corners, a tenderness that made me feel both exhilarated and cautious. I noticed the details, the faint brush of her hand against mine as she handed me sugar one morning, the softness of her voice as she teased me about forgetting my own keys. By the time I returned to my apartment after one of these brief encounters, my mind lingered on her, the curl of her smile, the warmth of her hand against mine, the teasing glint in her eyes. She had a way of making the ordinary feel charged, like something simple could turn into something unforgettable. And deep down, I realized that I was beginning to look forward to these encounters more than I should admit, each one leaving a quiet, lingering pull in my chest that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was fascination. It started with a simple invitation, innocent enough on the surface, yet heavy with unspoken possibilities. She called me one evening, asking if I could help her reach a high shelf in her kitchen. "It's nothing important," she said, her voice light, but there was a playful undertone I couldn't quite ignore. By the time I arrived at her apartment, my heart was already racing, a strange mix of anticipation and nervousness pulsing through me. Her apartment reflected her personality, warm, calm, and lived in, with soft lighting and a few carefully placed personal touches, a vase of fresh flowers, books stacked neatly by the couch, and photographs that hinted at a life rich with stories I could only guess at. She moved around the space with that effortless grace I had noticed before, her hair falling softly around her shoulders, her smile welcoming but knowing. We worked together in silence at first, reaching for the same shelf, our hands brushing occasionally. Each touch sent a subtle jolt through me, brief but electric, leaving a lingering warmth I couldn't quite shake. She didn't pull away immediately, instead, she let her fingers linger near mine, and the quiet intimacy of the moment seemed to stretch, filling the room with unspoken understanding. Finally, she sat down on the couch, patting the space next to her. "You're not going to leave, are you?" she asked with a teasing lilt, though her eyes held something softer, more vulnerable. I hesitated, then sat, aware of how close our knees almost touched. Her presence was immediate and enveloping, the warmth of her shoulder grazing mine, the faint perfume in the air, the subtle sound of her breathing, it all drew me in, grounding me in a way that felt simultaneously thrilling and frightening. The conversation that followed was easy yet intimate. She asked about my work, my dreams, my life beyond these brief hallway encounters. I listened as she spoke of her own experiences, touching lightly on her divorce, her past disappointments, and the quiet strength that carried her through each day. There was no judgment, no expectation, just a deep, human connection that felt rare and precious. And yet, beneath the casual words, there was a gentle tension, a current of possibility. A smile lingered at the corner of her lips as she teased me, lightly poking at my naivety, my hesitation. Our eyes met often, holding each other's gaze just long enough to make my chest tighten, my thoughts scatter. I could feel it, the pull between us, subtle but undeniable, growing stronger with every shared glance, every lingering brush of her hand. When I left that evening, the hallway outside her door felt emptier than usual. Yet inside me, a quiet warmth remained, a spark of connection that I knew would not fade easily. Something had shifted, something unspoken, and I sensed that this first private moment was only the beginning. The days that followed felt like a delicate dance, where every glance, every word, carried a subtle charge I could barely name. Our interactions became tinged with a quiet playfulness, moments that were innocent on the surface but heavy with unspoken possibilities. She had a way of teasing me that made my chest tighten, as if my own heart were conspiring with hers, daring me to respond. One evening, we ran into each other near the mailbox again. She smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips that made me feel simultaneously nervous and drawn in. "You always seem so serious," she said lightly, her voice teasing yet warm. "Do you ever let yourself have fun?" Her words were casual, but the way her eyes lingered on me, sparkling with amusement, suggested she wasn't asking just out of politeness. Our hands brushed again as she handed me a letter, a touch so fleeting that it could have been accidental, but the warmth it left behind was anything but. She noticed the quickening of my heartbeat and laughed softly, a sound that seemed to linger in the hallway long after she turned away. There was an intimacy in her teasing, a way of speaking that made me aware of her presence in ways I had never experienced before. Later, she invited me to help her with a small task in her apartment, a bookshelf that needed adjusting, some light cleaning she didn't want to do alone. Inside her apartment, the soft lighting created a cozy, almost secretive atmosphere. She leaned slightly closer as we worked, her shoulder brushing mine, the faint scent of her perfume wrapping around me like a warm, subtle embrace. Every casual touch, every accidental brush of her fingers, felt deliberate in its impact, leaving a warmth that lingered in my chest long after the task was done. Her teasing continued, layered with hints of vulnerability. "You're too young to understand some things," she murmured with a sly smile, her voice carrying a mixture of mischief and something deeper, almost wistful. I felt a flutter of both curiosity and caution. Her words hinted at experiences and stories I could only guess at, a life she had lived fully, a depth I longed to understand. By the time I left, the air outside her door felt charged, thick with possibilities I could neither control nor fully comprehend. Her teasing had awakened something within me, a mix of admiration, longing, and quiet tension. I knew I was walking a line I wasn't sure I was ready for, yet I couldn't stop myself from thinking of her, of the warmth of her presence, of the gentle pull that seemed to grow stronger with every glance and every playful word. It was becoming impossible to ignore. The magnetic tension between us was real, delicate, and entirely consuming. It was a rainy evening when she called me, her voice unusually soft, almost hesitant. She said she had a problem with her apartment, something small but frustrating, and asked if I could come by. I arrived to find her standing by the window, the rain streaking the glass behind her, her expression quiet and distant. She wasn't smiling this time. Instead, there was a subtle vulnerability in her eyes that made my chest tighten. We started with the practical task, adjusting the loose curtain rod, but the air between us shifted almost immediately. Her movements were careful, almost delicate, and every time our hands brushed, the warmth of her skin seemed to linger, pulling at me in ways I couldn't articulate. When she stepped back to examine her work, I caught a glimpse of her profile in the soft light, the curve of her jaw, the gentle slope of her neck, the quiet strength in the way she held herself. Yet beneath that strength was something tender, something fragile that she was allowing me to see. After a moment, she sighed and leaned against the counter, her eyes meeting mine. "It's been a long week," she admitted softly. There was no pretense, no teasing, just honesty, and in that honesty, I felt an unexpected intimacy. I moved closer, instinctively offering comfort, and for the first time, our hands found each other and stayed there. My palm rested lightly over hers, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers curl around mine, small but deliberate, like an unspoken invitation to stay. We spoke then, not of casual things, but of the quieter corners of our lives. She shared snippets of her past, her divorce, the loneliness that followed, the challenges she had faced as she rebuilt her life. I listened, offering only empathy and gentle encouragement, aware that any other gesture might break the delicate trust she was placing in me. Her eyes softened when she looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I felt the weight of connection heavier than anything I had known. The room was filled with subtle warmth, the faint perfume she always wore, the soft hum of the rain outside, the quiet sound of our breaths mingling. She leaned slightly closer, not in boldness, but in quiet trust, and I felt the pull between us intensify. The tension wasn't loud or dramatic, it was measured, intimate, charged with emotion rather than desire. When I left that night, I felt a profound sense of closeness I had never expected. Something had shifted. We had crossed a threshold, not of physical intimacy, but of emotional vulnerability, and it had left an impression deeper than any fleeting flirtation. I knew that the connection we were forming was real, slow-burning, and impossible to ignore. It was late one evening when I found myself standing outside her apartment door, unsure if I should knock. The hallway was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of the overhead lights, and the air carried that familiar, subtle scent of rain lingering from earlier. I could hear soft music from inside, a low melody that seemed to wrap around the space between us, as though it were anticipating the moment we were about to share. She opened the door before I could knock, standing there with a smile that was both mischievous and warm, the kind that made my chest tighten without warning. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she teased softly, her tone carrying a weight I could feel even without words. There was something in her eyes that suggested she had been expecting me, and perhaps, had been waiting for the courage she sensed in me to arrive. We moved into the living room, the soft lighting casting gentle shadows across her face. She sat down on the couch, patting the space beside her with that subtle invitation I had come to recognize. I sat, careful to respect the delicate tension between us, and as I did, our knees brushed lightly. The touch was fleeting, yet it felt electric, a reminder of everything building between us over the past days. Her voice lowered, playful but deliberate, "You know, one night with me, and you'd never forget it." The teasing edge of her words made my heartbeat jump, but there was also something vulnerable hidden beneath the bravado, a quiet acknowledgement of the feelings neither of us had yet dared to name. I swallowed, aware of how close we were, how every subtle movement, every glance, carried weight. Her hand rested lightly on my arm, warm and grounding. I didn't move away. Instead, I let my fingers brush hers, feeling the steady pulse beneath her skin. We shared a silence that was louder than words, our gazes locking in mutual understanding. I realized then that this wasn't about impulsive desire, it was about recognition. We had crossed from curiosity and teasing into something deeper, mutual longing, restrained by respect, strengthened by emotional trust. We talked quietly after that, sharing small confessions, laughter, and moments of hesitation, each word drawing us closer. The tension in the room was palpable but gentle, like a wire strung tight but carefully held. By the time the night ended, we weren't just neighbors or acquaintances, we were two people who had seen each other, truly, for the first time. Walking home, I felt the lingering warmth of her touch, the weight of her words, and the quiet certainty that this slow, intricate dance we had begun was far from over. Something significant had shifted, a deep, undeniable connection that neither of us could ignore. The days after that night were quieter, but in a way that felt fuller, richer. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic confessions shouted across hallways, just small, deliberate moments that carried the weight of everything we had come to understand about each other. Every glance, every brush of fingers, every shared smile had become a language of its own, spoken softly but understood deeply. One evening, she invited me over again, not for a task, not for a favor, but simply to spend time together. Her apartment felt warmer than ever, the soft light spilling across familiar corners, the gentle hum of music playing low in the background. She was sitting on the couch when I arrived, her posture relaxed, a book resting on her lap, but her eyes lifted to meet mine immediately, carrying the quiet warmth I had come to crave. I sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders touched lightly. The contact was natural now, effortless, yet charged with the intimacy we had slowly nurtured. Her hand found mine, not in urgency but in comfort, fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that spoke volumes. I could feel the steady pulse beneath her skin, a rhythmic reassurance that matched the quiet steadiness of my own heartbeat. We spoke softly, laughter punctuating our words, teasing each other gently, but beneath the lightheartedness lay a deeper connection, a shared understanding, a recognition of vulnerability, and an appreciation for the rare intimacy we had discovered. She brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear, her fingers lingering for just a moment, and I felt a warmth spread through me that was both grounding and exhilarating. At one point, she leaned slightly against me, her head resting lightly near my shoulder. I could feel the subtle rise and fall of her breathing, the quiet strength in the closeness, and the delicate comfort of simply being together without expectation. There was no need for words, the intimacy existed in the silence, in the lingering touches, in the glances that held meaning beyond what could be spoken aloud. As the evening drew to a close, I realized that everything we had built, curiosity, playfulness, tension, vulnerability, and trust, had culminated in this gentle, enduring warmth. Our connection wasn't defined by age or circumstance but by the slow, deliberate unfolding of emotion and understanding. When I left that night, the hallway felt lighter, yet my chest carried the quiet fulfillment of a bond deepened by patience and care. She was no longer just my neighbor or a fleeting intrigue, she was someone I had come to cherish, someone whose presence had become unforgettable. And in that realization, I understood that our story, though slow in its burn, had found its perfect, satisfying flame. If you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the channel for more slow burn romances you won't forget.